Testing, testing. Okay.
You could do it from like couch.
Yeah, that would be kind of weird, huh? It's like, all right. All right, cool. So how's everyone doing today? Emotionally stable, good. I love it. Yeah, React does this to people. Frameworks does this to people. They don't like to say, they wouldn't admit they're opinionated, but they do have opinions about how we do things in React. And that's why we have to kind of learn sort of all these different ways to approach things, all these weird little things that come up that people that are experienced with React know. I'm trying to share all that with you in a way that's somewhat accessible, right? Because it's not really easy to show you how to solve complex concepts if you don't really understand those concepts in the first place or why we're doing things. So I'm going to start by talking about building our own hooks. People know we can do this? This is an option for us. I mentioned it yesterday that we can build our own hooks. And I want to talk about how the reason why we do this is because in the past, React has never had a really good way to share logic between different components. You'd have a lot of copied and pasted code, or you would create components that were responsible just for logic, and you would use them. Again, this is going to all kind of just sound weird, right? You use them to compose that logic with other components. And so this is what I'm talking about. It's like, well, we haven't had to deal with those challenges yet, and likely we won't have to deal with those challenges. But it is a real part of React is how do we share logic between our components in a sort of clean, concise, reusable, testable, modular way. Right? So here it says, building your own hooks lets you extract. I'm going to increase that size, of course. All right. Lets you extract component logic into reusable functions. This is what's kind of cool about hooks, is that they are just functions, and functions are inherently composable. I can take one function, and I can get the output from that function. I can pass it to another function. I can return a function from a function that returns a value if I want. There's so much we can do with functions in JavaScript because they can be passed around as variables, as values. And so here what we're going to do is just go through a couple of examples of custom hooks, because the ones that we build, you're going to be sort of told what to do and maybe not necessarily sort of why, but the purpose is to keep our components as clean as possible and separate our logic from them and keep those things. The single responsibility principle that we've heard of is sort of what's guiding this, is that we don't want everything in one code, in one function. Okay? So here's a great, kind of an interesting example. Let's see. That might be too much to jump into. Let's go back to our notes, our lecture stuff, or I guess it's activity stuff. Okay. So for the stuff today, we're going to be doing building this custom hook, and this is the activity, or this is a reading. This is not an activity. So the goal is not for you to go through and build this. Okay? I don't know if that's clear or not, but it's a reading, so maybe that is what that means. Right? There's no instructions in here, though. Really what it's doing is kind of showing you how we can use these custom hooks to really reduce the repetition in our code and to make things, again, more shareable. So here's this example that I showed during that breakout yesterday afternoon, I think. And what I'm doing here is I've got 5 different input fields. So this actually, if you imagine what this component looks like, it's a form with a bunch of different inputs that allow the user to put in their first name, their last name, email, password, and a password confirmation. That sounds very useful, doesn't it? Sounds like a sign-up page, probably, right? Sorry? Yeah, like it just gets to the point where I can't show you much, right? But I'll do my best to. Yeah. So this could be a component. It'd be maybe you'd call it not application. You'd probably might call it form or sign up or something like that. Sign up component. But the point is that we've got a lot of repetition here, and really the only difference is in this case we care about the first name, this one the last name, email, etc. And then when we go down here and we create each one of these forms, we're creating them as controlled components, right? We're taking the state responsibility from them, and we're taking it and we're making that our responsibility, which means that whenever we change the first name input, we update the first name state, which causes this input field to change, right? To actually update as well to reflect that. And look, we've just done the same thing over and over again, right? Maybe not this one. A little bit different, but that has nothing to do with this stuff, which is still absolutely repetitive, right? Okay. So custom hooks provide us a solution for this. We get to decide that we want to have something. What we need here is, instead of this use state hook that we'd use directly, what we would use is something called use controlled input. Does that make sense? Use controlled input would be a hook that we could call, and what it would do is it would return a value and an on-change function. Yeah? Rather than a first name and a set first name, or a last name and a set last name. Like this will give us what we need to add to any form that we want, as long as it is the same value and the same on-change, that they go together. Okay, so this is what that looks like. I'm creating a new hook here. This is what we're doing. We're creating a new hook, and normally what I would do is I'd create a folder called source/hooks for this. It would go beside my components. It would go beside my pages. Whatever I have, all those folders in the source directory, I would have a hooks folder. And then I would create a file called usecontrolledinput.js inside of there, right? Because that matches the name of my function here. And then I would export this function by default from that file. Okay? I'll do that when I actually create my first hook, but I'm just telling you what I would do. So here, what this hook does is it manages state, just like we're doing here. Except we've generalized the terms that we're using here as value and set value. Because at the end of the day, the contents of those variables are irrelevant to the code using them. That only matters to us, that this is a name or a password that only matters to us. As far as React is concerned, it is a value stored over here for us to change or retrieve later. Now, in our control input, we're not going to use first name, obviously, because this could be a first name or a last name. So we'll just generalize it, use value. And then we return this as an object. Okay? We could return this as an array and do that destructuring thing that we did with useState. But the difference between destructuring with an OK, actually, I'll ask you the question. What is the difference between destructuring with an array and destructuring with an object, other than the types of braces that we use? What is the difference between destructuring an array and destructuring an object, other than the braces that we use? I think, yeah, so the first part, 100%. I'm not sure. As we went on, I wasn't quite sure if it is what we're talking about. But you're right in the sense that with an object, we name everything in an object. And when we destructure that object, we name the stuff that we're pulling out of it, and they have to match. With an array, that's not the case, right? So with an array, it's based on the order of things when I destructure it. Is that what you were saying? OK, good. Because I thought you were at the beginning, for sure. So here, when this gets returned, we actually get back an array of 2 values, and then we name those values when we destructure them, right? Whereas if we were to destructure an object, those values are named already, and we have to pull out the value, and we have to pull out onChange and use those names. Does that make sense? There is a way to rename them, but let's forget about that right now and just say that the difference between array destructuring and object destructuring is that arrays is about the order, and we get to rename things. But objects is the names are preset. Is that OK? So the reason they've made this decision here is because we actually do want, for each component, we want a value and an onChange, right? We don't want a first name and a last name, or a first name and a set first name, we want value and onChange because that's what this input field needs. We don't really get a choice with that, right? So this is how I would use this now here. I'm still able to set my initial state to empty string if I want. And I say use controlled input. Now, what is the value of first name? Sorry? Well, OK, let's go back and quickly look. What does use controlled input return? An object. This is the value right here. Okay? This is what we get for first name, last name, email, pass. Each one of these gets their own object with their own value. Everyone has their own value for sure, and their own set value function that points to each of those things that are stored for them. This is each one of these. Each one of these variables. First name is an object that has value and onChange, but it's a different value and onChange than what last name has, than what email has. So they each get their own value and onChange. Cool? All right. Now we get to do this instead of all that other stuff that you saw on there. So let's think about this for a second. Because that looks good, right? I mean, it may be confusing, but it looks clean, I think. It's definitely made this code a lot less. There's repetition, but I mean, at some point you do have repetition. It's just that we've not, to change things, it's actually quite a bit easier. So repetition where we have to go change one thing at a time, that's kind of one thing. But repetition that allows us to change something once and have that propagate throughout our code can help us with our, I guess, with just the speed of programming and all of that, right? So I haven't quite told you what's happening here yet, right? Does anybody know what's happening on the first name line? Forget the rest, just the first. Right. So this is using the spread operator to take the first name object, take each key out of it, and pass it as a prop to input. So it takes value out, and it passes input value. And it's first name.value. I mean, if we were to write this, we would actually have to do, ooh, that's got to be big. There we go. All right. We would actually do something more, like if we actually were to write it without the spread operator, let's do that now, right? So value equals first name.value, onChange equals first name.onChange. That's what we would do if we weren't using this spread shortcut, okay? Yes? Yeah, so. Second. I just want to also show this. This is our props object here, right? And this is what's actually happening is it's just a straight, like even though we are doing this as in JSX, when this gets converted, what we end up actually creating is what we would expect is this spread right into the props object that we pass. So do you have a question as well? Say again, please. Yeah. Yeah, it's like this. And we can kind of go back. Oh. Wow, it's so hard to navigate that. Okay, I got to do that first. There we go. So again, definitely going to be recommending people are kind of, as these topics are coming up, we really should be kind of reviewing these again, because obviously when you read it the first time, it's like, great, good information, now I know it's there. But the point of putting it at the front is not necessarily that you're going to learn it all, it's that you know where it is, that you can go back to it when it becomes relevant. That's a lot, these types of references have to be used that way, right? So to expect to learn all this stuff at this point without any practical application it's unrealistic. So we want a spread operator in here somewhere. There we go. So here's an array spread at the here. Oops. Where is it? Person. Person is an array of 2 values. Right? We can, if we do this, we end up with the wrong output, which is a nested array right here. That's not what we want, right? We want each of the values to be put in there. The first name, the last name, then the developer, then their type. So this is, we know this here. So spread, it's sort of like take each of the indexes of this object, or of this array, add each of them to the front of this array, and then at the end add developer to it. If I put developer first, the array would start with developer, and then person would be spread into the end of it. So it kind of depends on the order we do these things. When it comes to objects, what we start with is, and you are right, yes, I'm just kind of going over for everyone, yeah. Our original object has 2 keys in it, first and last name. When we want to create the profile, we take this and we are creating a new object first. That's what this syntax is for. We're creating a new object. We take this object, we take the first name and we place it into this object. We take the last name, we place it in this object, and then we take occupation and we assign it to that object separately. Is that, yes?
I understand current stuff. It was JS that we're using a key value pair, whereas for like what we see as value like don't need value is equal.
No, not with the spread.
No.
Oh.
Yeah. Why is that? Because it's a value pair. You then use value pairs value of the equal.
Together.
Like I understand that value is the name of the key,
and
so that's why. But like,
here,
could we then replace that equal sign there?
This one?
Yeah.
No, because I mean that's not JSX syntax, right?
But
like what happened when goes from
the spread gets the key and the value pair as an index, because the spread does the I don't understand where the equal sign came from.
Well, this is these are props, right? On this line, line 7, those are props. So we always assign props this way.
Yeah, but if you go like your previous example with the spread operator.
Okay. Oops. Oh, it's yeah, there we go. Okay.
Yeah. Here, that's a prop. I understand that password is a prop, and it's an object.
No, well, no password is an object. It is not a prop yet.
Password is an object that's spread out. Prop.
Okay. Yes. Yep.
Right. Because password is being spread into an object. That object is the prop. But where is the
here? So
go back to the use control.
Here?
Yeah.
I'm not. Well, so remember JSX gets converted to JavaScript, right? So this is what. So if this is the JavaScript that we run.
Yeah.
Okay.
How does that input the value? How does that convert?
Well, that would be.
Oh, okay. So it's actually sign in 7 is
On number 7, the equals. Yeah. Well, because so whenever we assign props, it could be anything we want here. I don't know. Day equals Monday. I mean, at the end of the day, if I were to do that as well, we just get day. Yes. Okay, so if that's not clear, we should definitely talk about it, because within JSX, all of this stuff here, when JSX parses this, it takes this stuff and creates an object out of it. That's what it does, and that's why we can. That's why I'm sorry. That's kind of confusing, but that's why we're spending so much time going over it, because spread is confusing, obviously, right?
I think it wasn't spread. It was
Oh, fuck.
It was the equal sign that we all assumed that that was how it was set when it was like.
Okay.
Because the spread operator is essentially a flattened for arrays. There are other functionalities getting head and tail from it, head and tail, but the basis of it, how the JSX is being used through JavaScript.
But you've just realized now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now.
Awesome.
It was
awesome.
Of not that, but more.
Yeah.
The
Okay. Yeah, and you can mix them too. I can do, as long as I do it in the right order, just like with object spreads. If I do key and then spread, I could overwrite something if there is something in that object that I've already set, for example. But if I do it first and then set it after, I could overwrite it that way. You have, again, this just becomes JSX or JavaScript, so you end up having a lot of those capabilities that you have with the regular spread operator.
Like the spread operator, other. Oh wait, yeah, you are.
Yeah, I did that here for sure, right?
Oh no.
Oh yeah, no, in here, yeah, right? Yeah, I can do this.
Spread operator.
Yeah. Yeah, you won't be able to do that. Yeah. So if you did this, I'll tell you what do you want to know what we're passing to this now? We just done that. Right? Yep. So when we decide that first name is an object, so we want to essentially, now this is going to go back to that other behavior of actually taking value and on change, putting them into that new object.
So wait, in the previous example, it was in value. Didn't know.
Oh, you mean when I do this? So by default, if I do that, it is true. That's why we're able to do danger and confirm without any other things. But you could say danger equals true if you want. You could say on your buttons, you could say confirm equals true if you want.
But it basically doesn't realize that that's an.
No, it doesn't. No, at that point, no. Because here is where we're choosing what the key is.
Yeah.
Whereas this is what's telling it, no, that's not. We're trying to spread this into the props object that we're creating through JSX. Yeah. Good. It's good to clarify these things, right? Because that is core understanding that we want to build up.
I think that
Keep that in. Always think about that. Always think that JSX is not HTML. It gets converted to JavaScript, and it's JavaScript that you can all write yourselves. It's just not fun to do, right? Because it's a bunch of React.create element calls that need to be nested. That is not nice code to look at. So we just need to think about. But we do need to understand what gets generated by the code we do like to write, right? Okay. So how do we feel about our custom hooks? Do we see that they could possibly be useful to us? Maybe not right now. I have a hard time thinking about sort of what things. But here's my approach. I write my components, and then I look at them and say, wait a second, these are very kind of similar. They're doing similar things. Maybe I should refactor this to a custom hook. It's never like, oh, I need to do this feature. I'm going to go build a custom hook for that, and then just add it and be right. That's very rare. So my approach is more to build the components in the way within the components, and then start to refactor stuff out into custom modules. And that's going to help guide it a lot easier when you don't know what to do. You're going to start to feel like, well, you just got to look at this and say, this is way too repetitive. Is there a way I can solve this problem? Hooks could probably give you that option. Let's look at some other custom hooks, because there's actually this site here that as soon as hooks got released, people went insane and they started releasing a whole bunch of hooks that they wanted to build, and sites like this called Use Hooks, which is I don't know if this is true for you at this point, so don't necessarily feel bad if these are not. Yeah. Yeah. So we're not going to go through all these because some of them are massive, right? Like look, we're not going to go through all these. But just to keep you in a, let's go through the names of them though, right? Let's actually talk about the names of these things to see what kinds of things people want to create custom hooks out of. Use event listener. Does that make sense? Instead of use effect, window.add an event listener, then I have to remember to clean it up. What if I created a hook that I just told it which event listener I wanted to attach it to with the function I wanted to attach it to? That's the interface that I really care about, but then I have to do all this other stuff with the browser. We can abstract all that away by creating a use event listener hook. And then here is how we might, do they show how to use it? Yep. So here, the top part is the app. This is the component. This is their test bed for this hook. This is not part of the hook code. Does that make sense? Whereas the hook code is down here. All custom hooks must start with the word use. The rule. It's how the linter knows that you have a custom hook. That's how the linter knows that your custom hook is a hook, and that it will start to actually start to apply some of those rules to it. If you don't say use first, it doesn't know. So they just said, let's do that. Let's all do that. I don't have a problem. Does anyone have a problem with that? Being told that your function hooks specifically should start with use? I don't know. It just makes things clean, right? Everyone. And then also I go to someone else's project. It's like, I know exactly what that is, right? So use event listener takes in an event name, a handler, and an optional third element. Why do I say that's optional when I look at this code? Yes, thank you, exactly, default. So I don't actually have to pass the element. By default, what is the element? Yeah, so if I want to attach event listeners to the window, then I call it like this here. No third argument. It is window by default. If I needed to attach it to something else, then I could put that as the third argument. But this is a lot easier than having to write that yourself, right? So it's going to be the point where, you know how you can download component libraries, Material.js and Bootstrap and all that for React? Has anyone seen that? Well, if you haven't seen it, imagine that there are way too many libraries out there, way too many component libraries out there. There's also going to be hook libraries. There's hook libraries like this, where you'd be like, I want to do a event listener. I'll just use my hook instead of having to think about the complexity around all of that. So they would, now here's the thing. This code here, for example, use ref, I'm not even going to talk about it. It's the next level of hooks. You've got set state, use effect, use reducer. That's one level. That's what we're going to do, okay? And then above that, you've got use memo, use callback, use layout effect. There's these other things that you don't have to worry about right now that are they're more advanced that over time we'll gain familiarity with. But they're more about performance and optimization and that type of stuff. So that's why I've left it out completely. Is because it's just too confusing. Okay. So use ref is one of these. We're not going to need it in our project, so I'm going to just kind of skip that. But just keep in mind, the point is all of this code that is oh, sorry. Oh, that's okay. Let's see. All of this code here so all of this code inside the use event listener, I could copy and paste that into a component and it would work. Most likely, I think. Maybe not exactly because of these things. But the idea is that this code could just be copied it could be copied from a component into my custom hook as I start to build it. Because really what it is a way to take that logic and put it into its own little module that can be reused. It's not really, it's still a hook, it's still all this code here, use ref, use effect, that is all still being called within your component. It's just being done through this custom function instead. Does that kind of make sense? That this code is still code you would just, if you wanted to do this in your component without a custom hook, you would just write this type of code right in the component. There's no real difference between the component we write in our, or the hooks code we write in our components versus the hooks code we write in custom hooks. Not a big difference. Okay. Let's look at some other ones. This one's called use why did you update. Makes it easy to see which prop changes are causing the component to re-render. So we could do that if we wanted to. I'm not going to really dive into it. But I think, oh yeah, they use React Memo, and this is again a performance thing, so we'll just kind of skip past that. I'm just kind of going through again what kind of custom hooks might we write. What about this one? Use dark mode, right? I don't know. I don't even know what that would look like, but I can kind of think about it now that all these apps out there are starting to add their dark mode support. So maybe my app has to have that now, and I have to have this idea of am I using dark mode or not, or like throughout my app in my profile component over here, maybe I have to know all that. Well, I can use this use dark mode hook to manage that behavior rather than having to write this code in every single component that needs to understand if it's dark mode or not. And here it's even using, it looks like another custom hook called use local storage within a custom hook. So you can actually compose these custom hooks together as well, which is very, very powerful, although, again, that might not be super obvious at this point, right? OK, so what else? Use media. Yeah, that's kind of like, I think, video and audio and stuff like use lock body scroll. I don't know. You can do things like use infinite scroll, use scroll to top. Those are all pieces of logic that cause side effects that we should probably abstract into a hook, so it's just easier to use those things. What else? Use history. I don't know. What else? It's so hard when it's like this. So use key press. Is this familiar? Hold on, where is it? Use key press. OK. Does this look familiar? Well, maybe it's this that would look familiar. Sort of what I did yesterday. Not exactly. I tried to make it a bit more simple. But what this is a custom hook that keeps track of the state of which button is pressed. See here, it's a generic name. It's not A, set B, or set W, set S, set D like I did yesterday. We've put that into a custom hook instead. And so instead of having to do the use state up here, we can manage all of this. And what this will do is return, I think, true or false, right? So at the end here, it returns if the key is pressed or not. And so every time the component re-renders, it asks use key, use key press? Use key press returns whether or not that specific key that's tracked by its state is pressed or not. So again, this is about sharing this logic, modularizing it, reusing it. OK, so I won't go more examples. It's not really, I think, useful to talk in detail about any of those. I want to open up questions, because I know I didn't really build any custom hooks. OK, but we could do that. I do want to make sure that I get through the second important topic of today, and then we could maybe do a custom hook afterwards. But we will want to take a break as well, right? So I'm not quite sure how to time this right. OK, so the second topic is about immutable update patterns. That sounds, what does that mean? Does that mean anything to anyone? Immutable update patterns? No? OK, that's cool. So this is a new term. OK. I'm going to just introduce it, and then we'll take a break, and we'll come back, and then we'll talk about it more in detail and how to actually handle it, right? I just want you, while you're at the break, think about the fact that React despises us changing state directly. React does not, we do not change state directly in React, right? We let React's set functions do it instead. Does that make sense? Yes? We never change state directly in React. It's like one of the #1 rules. And immutable data update patterns allow us to fit within those rules, within those guidelines. That here, I'll show you what I mean. My object has 2 keys. I'll zoom that in because it's not super. Oops, it's not super complex. Maybe a little bit less, right? Yeah, thank you. OK. Here's my object. It has 2 keys in it. If I say obj A equals, I am mutating this object, right? Yes? So there's one object in reference. It has the value, for A it has 3, and for B it has 2. Yeah? OK. We don't do this in React, right? We all agree on that? So we need ways to avoid this type of code. Because the problem is if I do this to my state, let's say I get that state object or something like that, and I change just one key inside of it, but I don't do it with the setState call, well, at that point, it has not re-rendered the application, right? Or the component. Therefore, my state is different than what is being displayed by my component. And then the next time some other state change occurs, now it'll show that change, but that's weird. That might be really, really weird to the user. So we make sure we manage all of our state changes and we never mutate objects, arrays directly. It's not really a big deal with numbers and strings because we always just replace those anyways. It's the objects and arrays where this becomes a real problem because those sit in memory and we pass references around instead of the actual value. Okay? How could I make an object, let's say other here? I want an object that is not the same as that object, but that still has the values 3 and 2 for A and B. I could say new object, right? That's going to definitely create a new object. I'm not mutating the existing, I'm not mutating object at all, right? If I do this. And then I take obj, or A is equal to 3 and obj dot, or what is it, B is equal to obj dot B. Because here is kind of what I've done, right? I said I want to take the value from the existing object, but I also want to change the value of one of the things. I'm trying to do two things here. I'm creating a new object with the existing value, but I want to change the value of A, so I do that here. This is quite. I mean, we all know you're looking at this kind of like that's weird, right? Maybe there's better ways to do this. So I want all of the stuff from obj, and then I want A to be 3. This is how I would do this, right? So this is an immutable update pattern. I am modifying one of the keys of the object, but I am creating a new object when I do it. This is a clone version of the object. Obj does not equal other. These two objects are not the same. Whereas, well, actually in this case here we've just mutated the thing. So it's, if I say other, oh, this is a good example. So instead of doing the right thing here, let's say I say, oh, I want another object and I want it to be the same as obj, and then I just want to take other and I want its value of B or A to be 3. Doesn't work, right? Because we've still just mutated the value from obj. So that's why we need to practice our immutable update patterns. And this includes adding things to an object, editing things that are already in an object, and removing things from an object. These are all things that we need to do for immutable data patterns or updates. Now, I know not everyone has gotten to the point where they're using the API yet and retrieving that data. So before we take our break, I'm going to finish off with one kind of thought here. When I retrieve days from the server, I get an array of days back, day objects, right? So for anyone who has not gotten to this point yet, when I make a request to the server, I'm going to get back an array of day objects. Each one has a name and a number of spots remaining. That's what I get back from the server. In my second request, where I ask for the appointments, I don't get an array back, do I? I get an object back. And when I ask for the interviewers, I don't get an array back. I get an object back. And it might be, is this weird for people that I chose to do an array in 2 objects? It's not consistent, right? I made that decision very specifically. I wrestled with it. I tried to figure out how to sort of approach this. And what I've done is instead of returning 3 arrays, I decided to return days as an array because it made more sense for that. Or then it gives me an option to show you how to actually update arrays. And then I created the other 2 as objects because objects are easier to update using immutable patterns. It's easier to update. So as we go through in this, after we come back from the break, I'm going to show you some of the differences between immutable updates with arrays and objects, and why sometimes we want our data structures to be objects, even though that means we might have to convert it to an array later to pass it to a component. Because that's OK, we can do that. We can always convert an object to an array and pass it to a component. And then there are these sort of more advanced techniques where people keep track of this object and then also an array that manages the order of the items. With an object, we have constant time lookup. When I want to grab something from an object, I don't have to search the whole thing for it. I know what the key is. I can just grab it. With an array, that's not the case. So we actually do choose our data types based on the types of operations we need to do on them. Any questions about this before we take the break? OK. Yeah, when we get back, we will do updates into arrays and objects. Cool. Oh, that's really unfortunate. I never switched to the screen.
I mean, you were just.
I was showing this stuff. I can send that out as notes. It's tough when there's no remote cohort because there's no one to remind you when you fuck up that. Yeah. All right. Well, split screens, new space. Okay. Yeah, it's too bad. I forgot to switch the screen on the video, so it's basically just getting ready to start while I just talk over it probably because the audio is still recorded. But I've switched it for the second half, which is where we're going to be talking about immutable data update patterns. And to me, this is really the this is the most complicated part of today, and probably one of the more complicated parts of not React but JavaScript, because this is not a React thing. It's something we use JavaScript for in React. Okay. So I'm using it in a React context to try and make it more familiar for you, but all of this stuff is JavaScript that I'm doing here. I'm going to create a new state at the top of my component, and I'm going to default it to be an object where every key is an index or an ID of a let's say a person or something. I don't know. And this is actually very similar to what your appointments and your interviewers data structure will look like. And when it comes down to it, if I wanted to create a list of these people, I couldn't just give React this state and expect it to iterate over this. I have to convert this into an array so I can map over it and do that pattern that we're all now hopefully familiar with, right? So one way I can do that is people equals object.keys, and what this does is it takes my object state, okay, and it gives me back an array of the keys. So what this is going to be, and I'll actually just show it to you. Actually, I think I don't need to log. I can just do it that way. And oh, use state is not defined. What do I got to do? Happens to everyone, right? Yeah. See? Okay, set state is assign a value but never used. Cool. All right. Why do I get 1, 2, 3 back? That's the keys of my object. It does not have the values. It only gives me the keys back, right? Cool? There are ways to get values, but let's keep going down this path and take these keys and map over them. I'm going to iterate now 3 times, right? The first time, I'm going to get the value 1. The second time, I'll get the value 2. And the third time, I'll get the value 3, right? Okay. Key. And this returns right? This is a very common, this is a piece of code that you might find yourself writing quite a bit. I'm going to convert this object into keys so I can iterate over it. And by that I mean actually like array iteration over it. Because I don't believe that foreign is iteration, but it's not real iteration to me. It's out of order. There's no guaranteed order. So in this case here, we're going to get these keys, and again, it might not be in that order. Okay, so just so you know, there's no guarantee that it'll be in that order because it's an object, but in practice, it usually is. I just think that it's too complicated if we try and think about it the other way. But just let's assume right now that this is going to give it to us in this order all the time. And there are solutions that we have to make sure we actually maintain order if that is actually very important. But for our list, I actually don't care about the order. I just want to convert this into a list and display it. So, oops. So now, this returns an object, right? So now people is no longer 1, 2, 3. It is object, object, object. So now when I try and render that to the, I get this warning, objects are not valid React children, right? So I can't render people, but I don't want to render objects. What do I want to render instead? An array of objects? Well, still that object will not write to, as soon as I try and put an object into, sorry? Sorry, I can't hear. Components. Yeah, I want to render components instead, exactly. So maybe I have something like this here that is my person component, and it can return a span with I don't know, props.name or something, right? So now, instead of this being array of objects, what I probably want to do is return a person component, right? And here I'd probably say person equals, because I don't want to be doing state key everywhere. That's kind of gross. But now I can actually do it with person. Of course, close that, right? So now as I iterate, I get the key, I get this, I convert the object, I iterate over it, I get each object, but what I return happens to be a person component instead. Okay, so here, those are the names, and I actually kind of prefer to do this, right? Because I want these to be each their own list item. So now I've successfully converted a list of an object full of records into an array that is way easier to work with in React. Unfortunately, we have to do this. So, and again, the reason why is because if we just had arrays from the beginning, yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to see the actual.
100%, yes. Always ask for that, right? Because you can't see everything here. So we have only been doing, like, we're read-only right now, right? We've not been updating anything, but we're read-only. And we've had to go through this sort of a challenge to work with this object. And again, the purpose is the object is easier to update. It's not necessarily, so an array is easier to read from and use in React, but an object is easier to update in React. And so we have this trade-off that we're dealing with. Okay. So in this case, we now have this list, and what I want to do is be able to add someone to it, right? I want to add a new person to this list. So that, what does that mean? Okay. Yeah, and then how do I get it in there? Where in my code? Set state. Yeah, I'm going to use set state. So what I'll do first is I'm going to create a button, because I don't want it to happen right away, right? And what I want it to do is function add Billy. Sorry? We will when we get to the set state for sure. Yeah, I'm going to show that to you. Yeah. So this function is called add Billy, and when we click on this function here, or this button, it'll call add Billy. And add Billy. Okay. So inside this function, I now need to add to the end of this object a new value, or a new key value, which is 4, and then an object that contains the records for Billy. So I'm going to say set state here, right? And I know we said previous. I'm going to do it first the other way, and then I'm going to bring it back to previous, OK? So here, my set state, if I just say for ID is 4, name is, I don't know, I like 2 first names. Well, actually, that's not necessarily 2 first names. My bad. So here, add Billy. I do this, and now Billy is the only one there, right? Because I haven't done what we need to, which is maintain everything that's there before. I'm going to tell you about older React and class-based React right now. Not super important, but this is a difference. In class-based React, if you look at any examples of set state in class-based React, they merge your objects for you automatically. OK? So in class-based React, set state acts differently than the set state I've created here. In this case, it does not merge objects because use state does not care what kind of value you use. It could be a number, it could be a string, it could be an object, it could be an array, and they're not saying, well, if you give me an object, I'll merge that into what I have already. They're not doing that for us anymore with this. So we have to use these spread patterns and all that to try and take care of that, which is a little unfortunate. We get used to it, and it's a lot easier for people maybe coming from already doing this stuff, but I think I think we're getting it. So this is a pretty clear example of what's happening. We're actually really replacing, yes.
Oh, I was just wondering, is there a specific reason why they decided to not include that in?
I don't know. I think it was. I don't know the real answer. If it was me, the way I think about it is, I don't really want that set state to act differently based on the type of value I pass to it. When I start creating API like that can start to get very confusing. I mean, we can be very clever and do very cool things with that, but we can also kind of take it, kind of go out of control. And honestly, if I were in React and I was using an object for set state, well, I'm not using set state anymore, or using state anymore. I'm using something called a reducer, which comes tomorrow. Okay, so what we're doing is we're building up our understanding of these immutable data structures, because at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff has come from a library. Has anyone heard of Redux? Okay, has anyone not heard of Redux? It's okay, yeah. So Redux, just like, actually, here, this is the best thing. The Flux architecture is a way for us to manage complex data in React. It's been around for a long time, which means there are lots of Flux implementations. I'm just typing that in there. Here, we compared, I love articles like this. We compared 13 top. How many do you think there are if they have 13 top implementations of this Flux architecture? Like, how many do you think? Okay, so kind of ridiculous, right? Here they are. Here's the ones they reviewed: Flumux, Fluxer, Marty.js, McFly, Reflux, and Fluxy. Redux doesn't happen to be on there. That's okay. You don't need to review it. It's great. So Redux is one of these implementations that's grown in popularity. I'd say Redux and MobX are the two libraries that are the most popular for React state management, up until now at least. The person who built Redux originally, he works on the React team now. Like that's just how it works. And now you have this concept of reducers in React, and Redux. A lot of that stuff is from Redux, or at least was popularized by this Redux library. Now, that means that this Redux library has documentation that is completely unrelated to the Redux library, but more related to how we need to use JavaScript to work with the Redux library. So here, when we get to Redux, what we actually have is, instead of set state, what we end up with is this function that we can pass actions to. And based on those actions, it will behave differently. It'll change that state for us. So I'm not going to get details. That's tomorrow. But this is where we're moving to. This is why we're taking this long path of immutable updates with set state. Seems weird. Why doesn't it just merge it for us? Well, normally people wouldn't really do it, so that's why they probably don't care. We'd move to use reducer when we get into a complex object like this. But I want to move us a bit more slowly. So here, see, like they're using the same type of code that we are here to return a new object that has all of the existing properties of the state that exists up to that at that point, and then changing the visibility filter to be equal to whatever was passed in here as an argument. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail on that, but I want to come back now and just say that's it's libraries and tools like that this will help us with. So instead of replacing this, how do we solve this problem? How do we make sure we maintain everything and then add it, update it? That's right. What are we, spreading in? Yeah. So when this function gets created, right? So when there's a certain level of what I'm about to talk to that doesn't matter, and then a small amount that might be kind of clear about how this works. But every time the function is run, that state value is for that run of that function. If the function gets run again, there's a new state value that's created for that run of that function. So if I decide here to say, oops, I'm going to take the existing state, which is right here, and I'm going to pass it to, or I'm going to spread it into my new object before I set the state, and I'm going to add the fourth key to it. This will work, I think. Right? But there's kind of a gotcha here that for most cases it's just fine. Now imagine if I didn't just have this like kind of clean, when I click it, it changes it and that's it. Instead what I had is I passed this function add Billy off to something, and then a bunch of stuff happens, some state changes, the component is re-rendered a bunch. That value of state is like 3, 4, 5, 6 iterations ago now, the one that we passed off. This is sort of one of the challenges with closures, is that when we create that closure and we pass it off, it still points to that same thing that we created, not this new state that gets created. So this is the danger. And again, I'm not expecting everyone to understand this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the rule that I have, that I'm teaching you, that you might not understand why, but just we need to understand the conditions under which we apply the rule. And then as we learn more about React, it'll become clear why we're doing it that way. So,
like when you're passing down like the set state, whatever, down into like another child.
that's not the same, because in that case, when the render occurs, it has that new state and it passes that new state all the way down. This is only when we create a function with that, hold it over here, and maybe use it way later.
Oh, I get it.
Right? Is that the state when that function was created is set to one thing. But then other things can change the state. And that state still, that old state is just sitting here as a closure, unfortunately stale now. So, yeah.
There's no like wrap to that stage to the one that's being updated or to the like
There is a ref, and React knows about all that. Right? So React knows about that, but I don't have access to that. Unless, okay? So here, this is the purpose of this type of a way of calling a set function like this. If I pass in a function instead, then it does not happen right away. It happens when React is ready to apply this state change. It's going to look and say, oh, what is the actual current value of state right now when this is called, not when it was created. Right now, what is it called? What is the state? I will pass that to you in this function, and you can use that value very safely because it is guaranteed to be the actual state at that point. Okay?
For the most part, is that like best practice? Just do it regardless.
Well, so here's the rule. I am depending on existing state. If I'm not depending on existing state, then don't bother, right? If I were actually wanting to replace it, there's no reason to do it. There's no reason to do this, right? Because I'm not depending on any existing values in this call. As soon as I find that I'm depending on props or state that is in this function, then I probably want to grab that, do that here. If I'm depending on the previous state here to generate the new state, and here's a very simple example. Oops. All right. So if I wanted to have a function, this is my action. I call these actions the things that change my state. I call them actions. And that's what Redux calls them as well. And that's why I'm trying to keep that kind of a term. But really, when I'm creating a function like this called increment, for example, that's my increment action. And what should it do? Yeah. Something like that, right? And if I wanted to do a decrement, well, then it's this. But I've depended on the previous value now. So as soon as I see myself doing that, and so now it's guaranteed to be the actual previous
And it
value.
just knows that.
React knows.
Right when it sees that, it's like, hey, I gotta do this.
because the real problem here is that when we create this action here, that could be created in one render. The composer could render many, many, many times and change the value of its state. And later on, this function could be called. When this function's called and we set the state at that point, if we do it this way, React will pass us what it knows to be this current state at that point in time for this set state call. Cool? OK. So that's the rule. So without fully understanding how React's rendering works, the rule is just let's add it if we depend on something if we depend on that existing state already. That is what I'm going to say the rule is. Does anybody not understand that point of it, that part of it specifically? OK. But we understand this data dependency, right? OK. So that's working. Now when I add Billy, oops, that. Add Billy, and Billy gets added to my list, right? You know what? I don't really want to put an input field for this. But normally when we edit things, we need an input field, right? Because someone has to type something in, usually, right? But in this case, I'm going to create a button here called onClick equals edit Billy. And here, or actually this would be more like edit name. Everyone's going to become Billy, by the way, if we want that to happen. So just change name. Let's do that. OK. So here, what I need to do is provide the ID of the person that I need to change the name for. That's like if I'm going to go into this object to change one of these things in here, I can't start without an ID. There's not much I can do, right? I mean, if I have the name, I can convert into an array, search through the whole thing, and then find the one with that name. That's an option. But the ID is really what we want to use for this. So here, when I call the edit name function, I'm going to pass an ID into it. And so this is going to be over here. And what this is going to do is call, I guess that should be down where Bill, well, we put above it. So here, edit name takes in an ID. And really what that's going to do is call set state. And now what we want to do is take all of the existing state, right? I know I'm not doing prev yet. I can always switch it over whenever I want, right? I usually start this way and then realize, oh, damn. OK. So we start with the state. Now what I want to do is find the thing with that ID, right? And I'm going to, this is where it gets kind of weird because I don't want to lose the current ID for that. I mean, I have it. I could say ID equals something like that. But what I want is, let's say, this is not just two values. Something like that. So these all have three values now. OK. If I just say in here, name is equal to Billy, oh, here. It's sorry, person.id. My mistake. I have to access because I'm in here, I'm in this loop. I pass the ID to the person component, no problem. But then the button gets a function that knows how to edit with the person's ID. So here we go. That's better. Yeah. So you're Billy, you're Billy, you're Billy, add Billy, you're also Billy. It's now modifying the item at that list item. So I'm actually going in there and I'm changing that. But what we'll notice if we bring up our tools now, that doesn't have an ID in it anymore. It doesn't have an ID or an occupation in any of these, right? So I just went right over top of everything in there. And now we have and we have this concept of a nested object here. This is where, again, it gets kind of tough to think about because what I want to do here is take state ID and spread that in there, right? OK, now I get ID, name, occupation, spread into this. And now the name can become Billy. Yeah. There are libraries that help us with this. But if we do not learn how this works first, then those libraries will not make any sense to us, right?
No,
Yeah. But just so you know, in practice, we use tools like immer, immutability.js, and actually ES6 has made this quite. Can you imagine what this would be like without ES6, without spread and like? Yes, it's confusing. I get that. We do need to really nail the spread operator, though. That's important. We have to understand that because it's just you're going to see it throughout everyone's code because React developers love it. They love it. Yes.
The main idea is whenever you're like changing an object, this like
I'm not changing the object,
no like
right? But I'm replacing it. That's the first important part.
yeah, just like this spread and save your stuff.
Yeah, if I want to, if I need to modify an object, if I need to modify an object immutably, then I need to retain everything that's in there. Means I need to create a new object with all that stuff first, and then I can change. Then I can change it. I mean, I could technically it's safe to write this type of code. Okay, so let's say var obj equals a1 and b2. As long as I do var other equals. So.
Why are you doing that on the other example when you set state that creates a new object? Because there you're creating like
That's a new object. These are new objects. This is a new object right here. This is a new object right here. These are all brand new objects. Yeah, they're brand new objects, so when I create this new object, I have to take all the existing values from state, spread them in. Yeah, cool. So here, I can do this. Obj, I create it. Just 1 second. I take that obj, and I'm cloning it now, right? Now keep in mind, if there are any children that are complex data types like arrays or objects, they do not get deep copied. They will have their references still. This is the real challenge. If you really, yeah. I know. I'm so sorry. This is not me that made all this up. I did not come up with all of this. This is not.
There's no way I'm gonna remember something like that. It's gonna be like.
No. But that's why again I've tried to put a lot of practice and again build this up and we're going to be doing this as we introduce little topics along the way and move it into different code and stuff. But yeah, it's going to take practice. It really will. And once you get here, you'll be like, wow, I see why people do this because it's just nicer to write JavaScript that way, right? Because otherwise, what we're doing here is yeah, we're actually going to have to copy all those values over, right? So here we can say, I'm going to take this object and I'm going to spread it in here. I'm going to create a brand new object. Other and object do not equal the same thing anymore. And then I can just go, now I can do obj.b equals 4. That's safe now, right? As long as these two things kind of happen together, that's pretty safe. I just kind of prefer that, right? That's just a bit cleaner. Yes? Yes.
Create, for example, count and set count. We have to know that these are paired together.
Well, count and set count, 100% paired together.
Okay, so then now we go into set state. Set state is going to create a new object each time we do something and stuff that in and just overwrite state with that object.
Whenever you use state, whatever you're passing in, it gets replaced. That's why, so it doesn't do automatic merges. And that's what, I mean, it works really well for numbers and strings, right? And when we get to objects, it becomes hard. Yeah. And that, again, that's why, but we don't tend to do that a lot in objects. I mean, we still do these patterns in reducers. We don't typically have to do this kind of thing because the state is passed to us in the reducer, yeah. Of course. Yeah, you can name that anything you want, yeah. That's right. So when I call this set state, I could have a few different state calls in this component. But when or let's say we have set day, set appointment, set interviewers, and those were objects. Well, if I call set day, it knows that is changing the day data, and so it takes the existing day data and passes that to me. When I call set interviewers, it knows it's changing the interviewer data, so it passes to me that as the current as the previous. Oh yeah. So again, we don't know how that works, but when we use state, there is this, it calls useState. It takes that value, puts it somewhere where it knows about, creates a function that also knows where that value is, and then it returns those two things in an array for you. Those are paired together. Those are created to be paired together. when you call that set state function, React knows because of closure. All that information is contained within that function, which is amazing, right? This is why people are moving to functional programming in Java in React, is because of these types of benefits. Now, I want to finish off and make sure we do a few more changes here, just to make sure we don't that we kind of see some of these kind of really, they're way more complex, but we want to see them, before we have to do this, right? So this, I think I linked to it. Where is it? Here. Well, so here's an article, using immutable JS with Redux. This is actually what people tend to do, or they'll use something like Immer, which is a library that does create the next immutable state by mutating the current one. So they can, and these libraries are actually designed to be very fast, whereas the code that we're writing right now is not necessarily very fast. Yeah, so there's a lot to take it, but before we do any of those things, we just have to understand the importance of immutability in JavaScript. That's what my message to you today is immutability is an important consideration when we're working with these tools. All right, so we've been able to edit the name, and I think if I were to confirm that now, we go in here, take a look at this hooks state down here, and we change Susan's name. The ID is still there, no problem. We've got Joanna down there, who's a plumber. Well, it's Billy who's the plumber now, but we've retained all of the state that was already for that user, right? Cool? And that was because we nested this spread operator. And it can go deep if you're not careful. So this is one of the reasons why there's this concept called normalization. We've heard of normalization with databases, right? Yeah? Okay. So we kind of have to do the same thing in React state trees, where we want to keep our state trees as flat as possible. And we also want to use references to things and not store the exact same state in two different places. So when we think about the data for the app here, I could easily say, well, this day has an array of appointments, right? And this appointment has the ID of, well, 1, I guess, and the time of 12 p.m. Okay, still not so bad, because if I wanted to change this value, I mean, I could replace the appointments with maybe I do a map and then replace the item with the ID 1 or something like that. It's still manageable for me. And then I get into interview, and then I get into name is, and then I get in, right? Changing, if I need to modify this here, when I book an interview, what do? I set that value. When I cancel an interview, what do? I remove that value. So if I have to dig down into my state object, down into my appointments array, find the appointment that has the right ID for the one I want to change, and then find the interview object inside there, keep all the stuff that's there except replace the, that kind of thing. If I want to change the interviewer, that's what's happening, right? It's just like nesting is going to make this very complex. So what we do instead is this appointment is not stored in the days object at all, or in the days array at all. What we do instead is we create something like this, where we can, okay? So now what I have, what can I do now? I reference it. And then there's only one copy of this. Now imagine I have a blog with comments or authors or something like that, and there's a bunch of comments by the same person, and for every comment, it has that person's information embedded in it, and for some reason, that information has to change. You have to go through every single comment for that person and change that information. But instead, if the comment just references a user ID, you can just, at runtime, grab all that information that's up to date from this object here. This is why our data is structured this way in this application. It's specifically about this challenge that we're facing. So now, if I want to modify this interviewer, it's still hard to do, but I don't have to deal with days and appointments array first before and figure out which one that is. If I know the ID of the appointment, then I can modify it. I don't have to care what day it was on. Any day can use that appointment, potentially. I mean, maybe in this case it's not a great translation, but I think everyone understands what I'm saying here. Is that just like with SQL table foreign IDs, we don't want to duplicate our data in our state tree. So that would be another rule we want to think about. That when we're building a React application and we're designing the state for it, we need to make sure that we have the minimal amount of state necessary to perform the task. And that means no duplicated state anywhere. Okay? If we can avoid it, of course. I mean, obviously, we break rules all the time, but if we can try our best to live by that rule, then most of the times it works out pretty well for us. Okay? So when so I guess let's go back. So this is kind of that problem of nesting. I'm not going to nest any further for you. There's actually, there's some examples. If we search for them, there's definitely examples, but there's also this section here, immutable update patterns on the Redux documentation. And here's where it talks about updating nested objects, because it is such a big deal for people that use this library, obviously, right? They talk about this. They try and, this is just talking about directly and modifies the existing state. Don't worry so much about this reducer part. It's everything that's going on inside of it that we're dealing with right now. And tomorrow, we're going to be moving a lot of the code that we write into reducers, because they're going to use the exact same patterns that we're doing with our set state call. So here, copying all levels of nested data. I've tried to make this as easy on you as possible by really trying to make the state as flat as possible. But there is going to be a little bit of challenge of changing that interview, because it's so deeply nested. Okay? And we want to create helper functions that help us with that. We want to be trying to make that as easy for us and any other developer on the team to do as possible. So the first time we write it, it's hard. But then every time we need to update that state, it becomes very easy to do, right? And that's the purpose of these abstractions and these tools. Yes, it's hard at first, but then afterwards, we're fast. We can make things quickly. OK. Let's get that commented out. And let's do another mutation. And let's say this one, for each person, remove person. Person.id. What do you think I'm trying to do here? Like, just by starting to write this code, have I sort of described what this next functionality might be about? And so where do I want to remove the person from? Sorry? From the state? Yep, exactly. So I'm going to create this function now. And it needs the ID. So here's the situation. It's not easy to delete things from objects, unfortunately. It's a little bit easier to delete things from arrays, because I can use the filter function. And that actually allows me to delete elements from an array pretty easily, right? Yeah, cool, right? I think that's cool. I think that's really cool about filter, is that we can use it for things that are not just filters, but actually like delete operations from arrays as well. But in that case, I need to go here and somehow get rid of the element with this value, but I need to do it in an immutable way. Yes. This is one option for sure, exactly. And that's gonna and so if I do it that way, then it's definitely immutable because all those conversions and mapping and stuff, that's creating new objects and new arrays all the time. So those kinds of help. Yes.
Is there like a
Spread, but oh, like yeah, you can use rest to get rid of stuff. Let me show you that one. Okay. I didn't want to get into it, but let's show it just in case. But there's so many ways to do this, and I'm going to try and show you maybe one or two, okay? But I like your approach. There's a lot of operations in there with a very, very big list that can start to get costly. But if it's I always go for like the thing that'll work first, and then I can refactor it later, no problem, right? So let's start by yeah, let's try rest right now. So I want to remove number. Wait, that's not going to work, is it? Sorry? I want to remove this, which means I want to destructure this out of it, and then keep the rest. Yeah. I think I have to do it this way. Oh, let's see. I think I have to do it that way. Yeah. And then, no, it's, sorry. And that is equal to the state, exactly. It's not working. Let's see. I don't. Well, so I want to try and grab that key. Because what the key is really like, yeah, it's because it's a number, so creating a variable out of it, that's kind of, so maybe it won't work for this. If it was actually a key, it was string. For destruction, I'm not sure. I'd have to look into this. Let's try one more thing here. I'll have to look into it. We'll have to talk about it after. Because the fact that that is a number, usually with destructuring like that, we would say, well, here is value, and then the rest of the stuff can go into that variable. But value is, in that case, the key name is not a number. Whereas if I try to say 1 here, it doesn't work, right? And that's my key name. So I have to go. I don't think so. Well, because it's not about the value of 1. It's about JavaScript syntax and using that as a. I don't think so. Like this is a really weird thing because what I'm not trying to give this is a string or a number. I'm trying to say there's a variable that I want to create a variable with this name. So it's a variable declaration, except I can't declare variables as numbers. So I think I'm going to not spend any time on that because I don't want to go over too long. But we're going to delete this here. We're going to say set state. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So here what we'll do is the point of this function is to return a new object of state without that person in it anymore. So I'm going to show I'll show 2 ways to do this because it is a really kind of complex thing. And the most important thing for me is that we maintain immutability, okay? I don't care how we delete, but we maintain immutability. That's what matters to me. So here, new state is equal to, right? That's me maintaining immutability. So this is not pretty, but my responsibility is to maintain immutability. So the first thing I did was I cloned this object, and then I removed the item from it. Because if I just delete the item from it, I'm not maintaining the immutability of it, right? So here, when I remove that person, what this will do is it'll create the exact same state object with another reference. It'll delete that key from it, and then it'll return that new object that is a copy of the old object. Okay? Is that okay? Okay. So let's see if it works. Oh, what am I got an error. No. Oh wait, I'm calling it right? I don't know. Let's see. Oh, oh, thank you, sorry. I'm so used to reducers, and in a reducer we would just return the new state rather than calling a set state function, so that's my bad. So this is actually what we want to do is we just call set state with that new state. Okay, but let's do it the sort of like functional way, because that's kind of cool. We'll still call it new state. And in here, we're going to say object.keys state map key state object. What does this do for me? Oh, key. What does this do for me? Sorry? Yeah, and then what do I get as at the end? At the end of this chain, what do I have so far? Sorry? Well, an array, I would say an array of these objects rather than an object full of these objects. Like so now this is a pattern that we need to get familiar with because it allows us to convert objects into arrays. There's also patterns that allow us to convert arrays into objects for things like indexing and stuff like that if we want to. So now we can filter, and this is actually going to be a person now, a person object that's passed because this is an array of objects. So now I'm going to filter out and only retain the objects that have an ID that does not match my user, right? Okay. Now, be careful sometimes when we're doing this. Something I've noticed is that sometimes our keys or our IDs or whatever are strings. Like when we get past params and express or something like that, it is a string, and then I try and compare them like this. So just make sure if this doesn't work, if something like this doesn't work ever, that you're making sure both these things are actually the same type, that they are both numbers when you intend them to be. And if I needed to, and if this wasn't, I would convert it at this point. Like if it came in as params on express, I would definitely convert it to a number when I wanted to compare it to an ID of a database, for example. So I know my person ID here is definitely a number. And this is also the value that is being passed here. So I'm confident those two will match. But it can happen that you're trying to compare two different data types because of the library, the way libraries give us things. So here what we're saying is I've got this array. I'm going to filter out as long as the person does not have the ID of the user I want to remove. And then I'm going to set state. I could actually take all this. I could put it right in there. But that looks gross, right? So that's why I kept it two different things. Up to you, though, right? That still works. OK. Let us do. So we've done edit and delete and remove. Let's do an array update now, because we should probably see that, and then that's where we'll end it. Is that cool? Or is there any questions before I do that? Because we've been dealing with objects so far. And so we can do things like, I want to show you how we can edit an array, for example. Let's say here, okay. Right here, we were able to modify the object through this constant time lookup of the ID, right? We're actually able to say, if I wanted to do this with an array instead, I definitely could spread an array into an array, but then I have to figure out what index the thing is that I want to change. And then I need to go and maybe find that index and then access it and then modify it. So array editing is way more complicated. And again, that's why I'm not storing appointments and interviewers as arrays, is because you're about to see what happens if we start to do that. mean, I guess since I just use the same data, I could technically take this object and pass it in here, convert it into an array, and use that as my initial. That would be kind of interesting. I won't do that now, but that's, yeah, I won't confuse you. Here we go. Here's my list. It is only slightly different, right? Do we see the very slight difference is that this is now an array instead of an object? Okay. I know arrays are objects. I know that. So yeah, so this array here, this list. Let's maybe add another list down here. Or, oh, am I missing something? Sorry. No problem. Okay. So, well, this is what sucks about not thinking about what I'm going to show you first. Is like having two people lists is not very fun. But all I need to do here now is get rid of my. It's somewhere in here. Here it is. This part, right? Or sorry, this. Yeah. I kind of have to change this. So, const. All right. Well, maybe that'll work. So here, I am mapping over my list. I'm going to create still another list of people, but they're going to be these people components. And so now person.name comes from here. So we can, I think we can, there's definitely an argument that says reading from arrays in React is easier. That, like, read-only arrays in React is easier than objects because we don't have to do this extra stuff here and all this extra stuff in order to use this common mapping technique that we tend to use. So I think arrays in React are easier to read from, but they become a problem when I want to edit the name for that person in that array. Okay, so now I'm going to do edit name array. Let's do this. And the reason why I'm keeping all this here is when I give you the example, I don't want to have a bunch of it deleted and replaced. So that's why it's getting confusing now. So sorry about that. But I'm doing it with you in mind, okay? So yeah. So here's two lists now, right? Edit name array, we want to create this function. It still just takes in an ID. And so now we've got this list down here. And when I change these, I actually want it to change them to Billy, okay? Same as before, but now we have to do this in the context of an array. List.find. Let's find the index of the person, right? Or maybe actually, this starts. Let's do it this way, and then we'll do it a way that I think is a little bit nicer after, because it's nice to see, one way that kind of makes sense with JavaScript, and another way that is more idiomatic. So here, every time this runs, it gives me the person object, and I want the person.id to equal ID. Do we understand what this is doing? I think it's actually going to give us a person object. So I actually don't want that because that's going to be really hard to change. I need the index of this thing, right? Okay. So that might give me the index of this thing. Now I need to guard that because what if it gives me -1? That means it doesn't exist in there. So now I need to be careful of that type of a thing. So now we're starting to realize that editing the array, even though it's easy to use the array, read only, it becomes difficult when we have to start to change that thing. So here we would say const new state equals or new, keep this the same, list equals the existing list. I've just cloned it, right? This is now I've satisfied my immutability requirement. I'm going to call set state, or sorry, set list with new list. Okay? And now what I need to do is say new list person index equals Billy. Oh. Sorry, yeah, it's exactly. Yeah. Okay, so this is, I mean, it is what it is. But the main thing, again, satisfy the mutability requirement. This will work. If you want to write code like this, no problem. But just make sure it is not modifying the existing object. So let me show you what I could do instead. List.map. What's this going to do? Or I can return an object, right? So I want to say in here, if person.id is equal to id, then I return with my modification done. Otherwise, just return what was there already, because it's not changing. So we'll come back to this in a second. Make sure it works first. Oh. Now what I've done. Oh, of course. Okay, so let's talk about this quickly. I am mapping over how many different items? Sorry? 3, yes, thank you. So I'm over 3 items, good. So my first iteration, person is equal to an object that has an ID and a name, right? I check to see if that person's ID matches the one that I want to modify. And if it does match it, this is an excellent way to create a brand new object that can replace the existing one for that one record in the array. Right? And then when every other one, if it doesn't match, we're not changing anything. And so we're just returning that object that has an ID and a name in it back. And what we end up with is a new list, a new array of all the existing objects, except somewhere in there, a new one was returned in our map function. So this is probably more how I would write this. And if I was trying to get super fancy, I don't need any of that right there. I can just do this. And I'm sorry, but this is the type of code that you are going to run into in React apps when you're working, because this is how people do stuff like this. They're using the features of the language to try and reduce the amount of typing they do. Yeah. Oh, so yeah. So I could also pass this whole list.map chain right into set list if I wanted to. I'm just trying to make it a bit easier for you to see that that's what's happening there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And actually, yeah, if I press save, at least it reformats that a bit for me. So
Instead of like ID name Billy, could you have like spread? So like let's say
actually, you're right. 100% right. That's what I would do, because I want to modify only the name. I want to keep everything that's there already. And if the object is small, well, ID and name is OK, and that's why I didn't really see it. If the object is big, then yeah, you want to be spreading it in there and not worrying about what's already there. Good catch, though. That tells me I'm not doing so bad. OK. How would I add to the end of an array? Right? Because I didn't do examples of add Billy with the array. Does that look like how I could just add something to the end of an array immutably? Kind of like a push, right? But not changing the existing array. That's why we don't use push, because push mutates the existing array. Whereas array concat will actually return a new array. Yes? Sure, no problem. Yep, of course. That's because you've satisfied your immutability requirement first, so go for it, right? Yeah. It's just that we need to. So out of all of this, if we don't still aren't able to write this code, no big deal, as long as we understand why immutability is important. It's just such. Yeah, we might not even get why it's important, but we do understand that React requires us to do this. So we don't get it. We just have to learn it, right? If I wanted to remove first thing, yeah, I don't. You can do all of the stuff that you can do with arrays. Feel free to do it, but make sure that it is not the same array and that you're not modifying that same array. Just always clone it first if you're going to do something like that to it. Okay?
And that's like how you see errors to catch. Like if you're trying to modify something for some reason, you get only that element or something.
Yeah.
It's because you're not
Spreading or something probably. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you want to be. And so using the outputs, console logs, the tools, checking your output. Like I went into that tool. Has anyone installed that React Dev Tools yet? The pre-release version, right? Okay. I would say, the pre-release version, so the reason why I never instructed people to install the original version again is because it is not useful for us today because we're using hooks. But I really do think now people could go look for that pre-release version, install it, and see. I spend a lot of time in, I guess because it's broken, right? It's probably the thing at the end, right? Yeah. Syntax error. Has already been declared, of course. Let's do that. Const deconst, right? Okay, I'll just comment that out so it doesn't do that. Now, you want to be spending your days here. I promise you, this is going to help you. Install this pre-release tool. If you have trouble, let me know. But look at this. We can see exactly what's in our state. We can see if those things go away or if we do it wrong, as long as we know to always check there and use that for verification. And again, I apologize it's pre-release. I can't do anything about that. But I wasn't about to ask everyone to install pre-release software on the weekend. That wasn't something I was ready for. So I think, well, except for the software I gave you that I wrote, right? So that's 2 hours. I want to keep these at 2 hours. I don't want to be going to 3. If you do have questions, please let me know. I have to go pretty quickly and back to work, honestly. But I'm on Slack all day, today, tomorrow, the next day. Okay? Don't hesitate to message me, and I'll make some time. And I want to help everyone get through this. But I won't be lecturing tomorrow, and I won't be here tomorrow on site. Thanks.